And welcome into the Most Accurate Podcast. My name is Anthony Stalter alongside John Paulsen. As always, I hope everybody had a happy Halloween. And as we draw closer to Thanksgiving, John, this is when the football season really starts to get interesting. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I chose not to watch last night's Thursday night game. Kind of kept an eye on it, the score and everything on my phone. It was interesting to see the halftime score and then the final score and then sort of look into what was happening. But I have to make business decisions at home with my wife and the time I spend with her. And I think subjecting her to the Houston Texans for 2.5 hours, 3 hours would have been a bad decision.
Yeah, I get the business aspect of it. We're going to get into John's Thursday night's thoughts. Really only one kind of key highlight that we want to discuss. Then we'll get into this week's biggest fantasy storylines, followed by the sleeper sneaky start of the week, and hand out some sneaky starts for week 9, and then see what John has in that breakout model, see who's popping this week. But John, that Thursday night football game, as you'd mentioned, 14-all at halftime. Houston scored right before the half. It was a Chris Moore touchdown, and he's filling in for Brandin Cooks. So that's the biggest storyline, right? It's Brandin Cooks. Lovie Smith did say today that Brandin Cooks would be in the building today being Friday. Obviously, he was upset because he wasn't traded at the deadline. In fact, he spent the entire day of the trade deadline liking any rumors of him going to another team. So he was upset. He shared some of that on Twitter. From a fantasy perspective, John, the question I think is, do you hold on Brandin Cooks, or do you just release him and call it a day?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted out a GIF, one of my favorite GIFs of a karate guy getting kicked in the butt or kicked in the nuts over and over again. You're holding Cooks heading into the trade deadline, thinking that he's like one of the prime guys that's going to get moved and probably go to a better team that's in playoff hunt. And, his tenure in Houston was really good last year with Davis Mills. This year, they just haven't been connecting as frequently. He's doing all right, but he's not at the level, every week starter like he was last year. And you go into the trade deadline, he doesn't get moved, and then he's upset about it, and to the point where he's not at practice and can't play on Thursday. So now you're losing another start out of him in a game where he probably would have done something based on what happened with some of these other guys. Got a lot of, cut him, drop him, you don't want him on, he's done, blah, blah, blah. But I was just kind of preached in my AMA yesterday. I believe I mentioned that just hold him for a week and see what happens. I don't think this is going to go completely sideways where he doesn't play football anymore. They could perhaps cut him if he's too much of a distraction, or more likely he'll be back to try to prop up his value heading into the offseason, where maybe he can get moved to another team, or, kind of start over fresh in Houston next year, potentially. Just with the game, sometimes I just look at these box scores and, looking for surprises. And this one kind of looks like what I would think Houston Texans, Philadelphia Eagles game would look like if the Texans didn't have Brandin Cooks or Nico Collins. I bumped up Philip Dorsett and Chris Moore, but not to the point where you're thinking, yeah, let's start these guys, or these guys are like true sneaky starts, because, I just didn't know how many yards Houston would throw for. I thought they might even feature Rex Burkhead a little bit more in the passing game. That didn't happen. Maybe those tight ends would get something. They didn't get anything. So it really did go to these two receivers, and they were startable. 4 for 43 and a touchdown for Chris Moore, 3 for 69 for Philip Dorsett in a short week. It could have been useful. I think I had them ranked as wide receiver 5s this week. Dameon Pierce continues to impress. I mean, you're coming in as the Eagles, and you know that they've got Pierce this week, and what else? and he still rushes for 5.1 yards per carry and 139 yards. That's really impressive. They didn't get him involved in the receiving game at all. And then on the Philly side, from a fantasy standpoint, nice to see Miles Sanders really capitalize on a great matchup. He's not offering anything as a receiver, which is the danger with him. If he doesn't find the end zone, then you might end up with 80 or 90 yards, and that's it.
Yeah.
But looking at the receiving stats, Dallas Goedert goes nuts. AJ Brown has a good game, and Devonta Smith doesn't. So if you remember Anthony talking about the Eagles coming in, we just wondered if Jalen Hurts would throw for enough yards to support 3 receivers on a weekly basis. And this is a week where, Smith didn't get there because Goddard got 100 yards and a touchdown. So, he was a disappointing. I had him ranked a little bit lower than average. It's hard to trust Devonta Smith. He can go off for 150 yards receiving or go for 2 for 22 on 2 targets, which is what happened last night.
Yeah, I needed him in our league, John, because I had some buys, and I got a bunch of buys, and I was forced to play him, and dud of a night, only 2 receptions. But as you mentioned, Dallas Goedert, big game. AJ Brown with a really decent game. Certainly nothing to what he had a week ago when he caught the 3 touchdown passes, but very efficient game for the Eagles. Let's move forward here. We'll talk about some fantasy storylines. In fact, the biggest ones that are going to impact fantasy managers this week. Let's start off with Derrick Henry. He was limited Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday, but apparently it's not injury related, John, and he'll play. The Titans have the Sunday night game. Do you see any concern for fantasy managers that have Derrick Henry?
This is slightly weird because, when this kind of broke yesterday, or, when I saw the news, it was supposedly foot related. And then, he had a little press conference saying that he was going to play. And then it came out, the official injury report came out, and it said not injury related. So it's just a little note. We'll see what he does today. I'm not worried until he is either limited, or if he's limited today, I'm probably fine with him starting. If he's a DNP today, I would get concerned. I would think that Dontrell Hilliard is the primary, but Hassan Haskins is there. So you're probably going to see some sort of committee between the two if Henry had to sit. But I don't, I'm not alarmed at this point.
It's more alarming if you have Jonathan Taylor on your team because he's back-to-back DNPs. Jonathan Taylor managers have they've had a very frustrating year because obviously they invested a high pick in him. When it comes to his availability, what's your thoughts? And then what are your thoughts, obviously, on Deion Jackson, who would get, I would imagine, the RB1 role in Indianapolis as they take on the Patriots?
I watched a video of, I think it was Ian Rappaport this morning, talking about this, and it wasn't. He says it could just be load management. He doesn't seem like he has any inside info on how bad the ankle is right now. So it's a matter of seeing what Taylor does today, whether or not we can count on him. If he's a DNP, then I would really be prepared to make a pivot, find something. I mean, Deion Jackson's probably not available on the waiver wire. I'm looking at the wrong week. My schedule, I was looking ahead to week 12. But the Colts play early, which is good. So have a pivot ready if you are heading into Sunday wondering if he's going to be ready to play. He's certainly startable if he's active, but this offensive line has been the primary problem, and then his own production has been the secondary problem. The line is not blocking anywhere near where it was last year. But Deion Jackson, is a good pivot in that he did really well in terms of a bell cow role when he had his opportunity earlier this year, and fairly trustworthy. I think I have Taylor right now at 15, which is, a far cry from where he was drafted. Thinking that if he is playing, he's probably going to be limited somewhat, not get that 90% carry share that he would normally get. So if he's out, I would probably put Deion Jackson about 18 to 20 in that range because he's likely to get that bell cow role if Taylor's out.
Well, as we know, John, the Chargers have a great matchup this week against the Falcons as we dog on Atlanta's defense, I think, every year for 10 years now, which really goes to show you where they are as a franchise. But the Chargers wide receiver group, Keenan Allen suffered a setback. We know Mike Williams is going to be out for several weeks, probably a month plus. That leaves Josh Palmer, DeAndre Carter, Gerald Everett, the tight end, and then Austin Eckler. And Austin Eckler limited, but not worrisome, apparently. When you look at this group, again, it is a really good matchup against a depleted and not very good Atlanta defense. So who do you like out of this group?
Yeah, I thought about moving this topic up in our rundown, but I didn't want to start off, the Friday morning with so much just an instant troll job of Anthony and his Falcons.
That's all right. They are in first place for now, so
yeah, that's true. Doing better than the Packers. So that's not saying a whole lot. The Chargers are definitely in flux at receiver, and this is an opportunity. Shallow leagues. Josh Palmer might be out there. Very shallow leagues. DeAndre Carter certainly could be. Palmer's been better than Carter, but Palmer hasn't been like a no-brainer start in this situation. But I did rank him fairly high. Given with six teams on bye, you're going to have to start looking for some guys that maybe make you a little bit uncomfortable in starting them. And against your Falcons, obviously a fantastic matchup for Palmer. He would be the likely target lead in this offense. And then the third guy, obviously Gerald Everett at tight end. The third guy I wanted to mention is Michael Bandy. Now, this is probably not a name that rings a whole lot of bells, but he played the third most snaps, I think, after these two guys. Like, if you're assuming Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are out, he's the third guy. They also could go to Donald Parham as a second tight end and run more 12 personnel, which is certainly possible to play Palmer and Carter, and then the Everett and Parham if they deem Parham to be a better guy to have on the field than Bandy. I think Bandy, if I'm not mistaken, is a little slot guy. So, if my memory serves, so Justin Herbert, a little bit of a downgrade this week, but you have to love the matchup, right, Anthony?
Yes, absolutely. I think we can hit that a couple more times, right? Let's talk now about, and I love the way that this question is phrased, because like, why the heck couldn't we trust Cooper Kupp? But Cooper Kupp did get injured last Sunday, missed practice on Wednesday. He did return to a limited practice on Thursday. So, John, can we trust that Cooper Kupp will play?
It seems like he's on track. I mean, I think with the limited on Thursday, that's better than the taking Wednesday and Thursday off and getting a limited on Friday, because you see that a lot, right? Like guys really trying to make it back, or teams trying to get him back, and they try the major rest, and then they bring him back on Friday for a limited to see how he does. Coming back on Thursday means he felt good enough to come out there on Thursday and put some work in. Ankle sprains. Adam Hutchinson did this great article. It's called the 444 Fantasy Football Injury Index: How do injuries affect player performance? And what he found, averaging hundreds of different, samples, injuries, different positions, high ankle sprain, or not a high ankle sprain. He doesn't have a high ankle. He's a low ankle sprain, non-specific. Average weeks missed is 3.2, but sometimes there's players that can come back the next week if it's minor. Fantasy production change 1 week is minus 12.6%. So that's sort of what we're perhaps expecting in his first game back is a drop in his overall production by about 12-13%, which is probably where I'll put him if he's going to play on Sunday.
All right, we'll do our injury roundup right now. I'll just throw a bunch of different scenarios at you, John. You can go piece by piece here. The Ravens are dealing with significant injuries. What else is new? Gus Edwards did not practice on Thursday. Mark Andrews was sidelined for yesterday's practice, being Thursday. Rashad Bateman, as we know, he will undergo season-ending Liz Franken surgery, so he's done for the year. That would open up the door for guys like Kenyon Drake, Isaiah Likely, who had the huge game last Thursday night or 2 Thursday nights ago. Was it last Thursday night? I guess the Bucs. Yeah, it was last Thursday night. Isaiah Likely with a couple touchdowns last week, and then Devin Duvernay. if you want to kind of talk about Mark Andrews' injury first, because I think that leads obviously to the Isaiah Likely conversation. And then what do you think about a guy like Duvernay?
Yeah, with Bateman done for the year, that certainly supports Duvernay as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type spot start guy that you definitely need to have rostered if he's out there on the waiver wire. Not a consistent performer, but certainly somebody that can come in and get some points as the de facto number 1 receiver for the Ravens. This really supports Mark Andrews' monster target share rest of season. I think in the backfield, you're looking at a start by Kenyon Drake this week with Justice Hill sprinkling in, given the way Drake's been playing pretty well. Hill's been getting healthy. So I think that's what you're going to see if Edwards sits. And then I think with Likely, you might kind of the same conversation we just had with Parham is that, Likely's better than Parham right now in terms of fantasy, but the Ravens could decide to just run 2 receivers, 2 tight ends, and get Likely out on the field 70-80% of the snaps. And if he is, then he might work his way into the low end tight end 1 conversation on a weekly basis if he's seeing that sort of snap share and then target share. So if Andrews, there's lots of moving pieces here. If Andrews sits, which we'll know today whether or not he's likely to sit, I think, based on his practice participation today. He's got a shoulder and a knee injury, but the shoulder is what knocked him out of that game. If he sits, I think Likely is in the top 5 or 6 at the position, just looking at the position this week, given 6 teams on bye. So Likely should definitely be rostered right now if he's not, especially if you need a tight end or have any sort of tight end woes in your leagues. He's a good upside guy with Andrews sort of struggling with injury. I think that kind of covers it. I mean, Demarcus Robinson probably in really deep leagues is probably still a better hold or play than Deshaun Jackson, who is, mid-30s, and I don't think he was active last week. So I don't know how much he's going to come in and play. He's certainly not going to be a 70-80% snap share guy, whereas Robinson is capable of running all those routes.
All right, we'll move forward here with the Saints injury situation. Michael Thomas, he's going to have surgery on that toe. He's going to have to go on injured reserve. His season is now over with. This just, I think, cements Chris Olave's status within that offense. I mean, he's their go-to guy.
Yeah, and absolutely top 15 rest of season receiver. Actually, absolutely having a phenomenal rookie season, but this injury to Thomas has certainly opened the door for him to see all those targets. And then Jarvis Landry was back at practice yesterday, so that's just somebody to keep an eye on. If he can get back in the fold, he's still a better player than Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway and stuff. So just, keep an eye on Jarvis Landry. If you're in a deep league, PPR format especially, he might be worth a pickup.
All right, let's talk about James Conner now. Do you think he's back for Arizona?
It appears so. He's limited last 2 days, I believe, and seems to be on track. And another thing you look at, especially with a rib injury, is that he looked like he was fairly close to playing last week. And when that happens, usually the following week is the week where they come back. And I do think he'll come back to the lead role. Benjamin might continue to serve as that number 2 back, or might eat into his workload a little bit more, especially if they're trying to ramp him up instead of throwing him out there for 80-90% of the snaps. But I think Conner, especially in a short week, is startable as an RB2 in his first game back. I don't have a ton of confidence in it, but if you look at those RB rankings, it's kind of, you just got to do what you can do to get somebody out there that might get 15 plus touches. And I think he's in that category.
And then the Bengals, Jamar Chase, Zach Taylor, head coach, he reiterated that not putting Chase on the IR speaks to their hopes that he will return potentially sooner than December 4th. Jeremy Rauch of Fox 19 says not going on IR indicates that they think Chase can return before week 12. So, could we see Jamar Chase by week 11?
Yeah, that's why I actually had that week 12 schedule up, trying to figure out what they were talking about with December 4th, because it just, this whole situation, I'm getting lots of questions about Jamar Chase. Should I trade him? Should I, obviously you're going to hold on to him if you either hold him or trade him. But I think he's going to be back fairly soon. When a team doesn't place the player on IR with an injury like this, even though the initial reports indicated he for sure should go on IR, that means they know something that we don't. And it just indicates that this is not a 4-week injury. They think he might be back sooner. So he may not make it back by week 11, but they obviously felt like there was enough of a possibility that he would, that they didn't place him on IR. So I'm fairly optimistic about Jamar Chase rest of season. Not being a doctor, not being a physical therapist, just based on what the Bengals have done with him so far with this injury.
Chuba Hubbard of the Panthers was limited both on Wednesday and Thursday in practice, so at least he was limited. I think the big question is, after what D'Onta Foreman did last week against the Falcons, John, I mean, I think the big question is, how much will Chuba Hubbard play and how much will he carve into Foreman's carries?
Yeah, so this is, looking at this after 20 plus years playing fantasy football, there's certain, like a James Conner, you can sort of come back and say, okay, he's gonna come back to his usual role, or at least 80% of his usual role. Chuba was starting, quote unquote starting for the Panthers before his injury, but he's not the type of player with the resume that Conner has, or the salary that, frankly, that Conner's contract is pretty hefty. So the Cardinals want to get some use out of him. So I think, with the way that Foreman has played, we knew that he was capable of this in short stretches after the nice run he had with the Titans last year. So looking at this for this week, Hubbard, I mean, the injury gives, excuse me, the Panthers an excuse to, sort of ramp Hubbard up and use him in a change of pace role. So long story short, it would knock Foreman down a little bit if Hubbard is available, but I still think that he's a pretty solid start as an RB2, given, everything that's going on there.
So, John, speaking of running backs, Cam Akers, he did return to practice earlier this week, and he was mentioned in trade rumors. Nothing materialized. He remains with the Rams. When you're looking at the Rams running backs, though, what's your overall take on this?
I think our wonderful producer Sal, put in the Rams running backs matter question after this segment, but I think they do. I mean, I think this year it's less. They matter less this year than last year. The team's not chugging along as well. The Rams are last in the league in adjusted line yards, so the offensive line's blocking horribly compared to last year. And I think for some reason Sean McVay, I mean, I kind of got into a little bit with, like, why does Sean McVay hate Darrell Henderson? And I don't know that he hates him. I think he's reluctant to give him 20 touches because he's a smaller guy. He's shown that he can't hold up to that sort of workload, but he's done very well in the lead role.
Yeah.
If you're rotating him out and you're getting him 15 to 17 touches, certainly with 4 in the passing game, that he can handle that and produce from a fantasy standpoint, at a low end RB1, high end RB2 type level. That all said, he was sick last week, limited on Thursday, full on Friday. Matthew Berry tweeted out that he thought Ronnie Rivers would get a long look. He did. That was correct by Matthew. Rivers got the long look, didn't do anything with it. I thought the full practice on Friday meant that Henderson was very likely going to be the lead back. Like, to me, watching Henderson, he's their best guy. I don't know why they're not, his yards per carry this year isn't great. I think it's like 3.9, but if you look at the other guys, it's way better. So he's doing what he can with the offensive line blocking that he's getting, whereas the other guys aren't doing even that well. So, they're looking for quote unquote punch out of the running game. I don't need to think they need to look any further than Henderson. So I'm going to get off my soapbox. I also own him in our keeper league. So, all right, I have him rostered in our keeper league, I should say.
Sure.
So I would like him to do well. But that all said, with Akers back, anything can happen here. We thought he was going to get traded for sure, but even like a cheap move for somebody that wanted to take a look at him, but it didn't happen. And now they're, having these behind the scenes, this is a very weird situation, between Akers and the team. And you don't see this very often, where players patch things up with the team and then get another chance. We have no idea what really happened in the background. Probably had something to do with his usage and role, and maybe the coaching staff being too critical of him and his play. I think heading into the rest of the season, I still have Henderson as the highest stubbornly in rest of season rankings. But that, like I said, that might be just stubbornness on my part.
Well, you're not wrong, John. I mean, if you watch him run, you're absolutely right. And Sean McVay, though, he's not somebody that's going to stick with the run. Kyle Shanahan, similar guys, but Kyle Shanahan will stick with the run. He doesn't have to get pass happy, and I think that Sean McVay does. And this is coming from somebody who has not won a Super Bowl. So take that with a grain of salt. Darren Waller's our last injury guy that in our roundup here. What do you do with Darren Waller? I mean, this is another situation where you think that you grab him and think, all right, I'm set now at tight end. I've got one of the 5 tight ends that could be decent this year, and instead, Darren Waller has not been healthy. Do you think he plays this weekend? And you think, more importantly, does he get back on track?
Well, Darren Waller sort of feels like the Keenan Allen of tight ends right now, in that just can't get this hamstring healthy. If he's out there, I mean, if you look at his target shares, yard shares, reception shares, he has not performed at the level, anywhere near the level that we are used to with him. I think that was certainly my concern heading into the year, that you're adding Davante Adams to this offense. The pie is going to have to grow significantly to support Waller, Renfrow, Adams. Certainly Renfrow is going to take a step back regardless. But, you're looking at this like, can Derek Carr support a wide receiver 1 in Davante Adams and a top 5 tight end in Darren Waller? And I think we've seen that the answer is no. The passing game is not prolific enough. In games that Waller does play, it seems like Davante Adams gets a lot of targets. Waller's targets aren't there. His yardage share is not there. He's not playing that great in terms of his per target production compared to years past. So tight end position is such that you might be stuck with him, and you're looking at your options, and you're looking at Waller versus a Tyler Conklin or a Tanyan or something, and you're trying to decide. I would sort of determine it based on the weekend reports. If he's full today, then that's a pretty good sign that he's going to play a lot. If they say that he's going to be limited heading into Sunday, then I probably would stream a tight end that's going to play 70-80% of the snaps, because you just need to get, if the player's not out there, he can't score fantasy points for you.
So you've heard John and I mention a couple of times now that we use that we play in a league together, and it is run by Sleeper. And Sleeper is one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the industry. You can use it to replace any of the leagues that you become frustrated with, and trust us on this. Sleeper is fantastic. We've been using it now for our league over the last couple of years. Love the app, love the website. It's easy to use. And, there's a learning curve with anything, but once the learning curve is done, again, you'll absolutely love it. So head to sleeper.com or download the latest app today. In fact, do both. So, John, without further ado, it's time for the Sleeper sneaky start of the week. And this is somebody that kind of got lost in the mix when Brian Robinson came back from his gunshot injury. And Antonio Gibson he's kind of just trucked along here, had another touchdown last week. Washington continues to use Antonio Gibson, and he is your Sleeper sneaky start of the week.
Yeah, and props to Antonio Gibson for just putting his head down and playing football, and not requesting a trade or getting disgruntled, because he could have easily gotten, turned into a locker room cancer if he wanted to, because he's being demoted, and really hadn't been outplayed on the field to earn that demotion, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So Robinson has not, props to him also for coming back from getting shot. Like, that's amazing. But he's averaging 3.2 yards per carry. I think they were expecting more from him. Gibson has been a little bit better, 3.7. J.D. McKissick, 4.3. I like to look at those different running backs, because you're trying to determine if it's a offensive line problem or if it's a running back problem, a specific running back problem. But Gibson has been really good the last 2 weeks. I believe he drew to start last week, which was interesting because Robinson had been starting. But he's found the end zone back-to-back games. He's had touch counts of 13 and 14 in that span. And I think the reason I wanted, there was a few different guys that we could have talked about in this spot. But the reason I wanted to mention Gibson is I just wanted to bring the attention that J.D. McKissic, his injury, he's got a neck injury, did not make practice Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. So if he's out, all those routes are up for grabs, and it's far more likely that Gibson gets those than Robinson. Robinson's okay. He caught a pass, I think, against the Packers. He looked okay doing it. But Gibson, obviously a former receiver, has really good pass-catching chops. If McKissic is out, then I think Gibson moves up like into the middle of the RB2 ranks due to that. He'll have a 10 to 15 carry role plus another 4 or 5 catches. So that's my sleeper sneaky start of the week.
He almost got you now. All right, these sneaky starts. Let's go over these. At quarterback, we'll give out a running back, and actually we'll give out a wide receiver, and then we'll give out a tight end. And you can go to 4for4.com to see the entire list. We always talk about this. John gives a more comprehensive look, more sneaky starts at each position. This is just the appetizer, but Aaron Rodgers cracks the list, and it's amazing, John, for a couple of reasons. One, that he's considered a sneaky start, and two, with the way that he has played, that we're even talking about him at this point. And it's not necessarily all him, as you know, as a Packer fan, John. There's a combination of things going on with that Packers offense, but Aaron Rodgers, nonetheless, has a great matchup against Detroit.
Yeah, Rodgers it was funny to see him, and I was like, well, I got to put him in here because of where he's being ranked and where he's kind of produced. And his season's been funny, as we know, but if you look at week 2, if you just ignore that Vikings game, let's just all pretend that didn't happen. He's been a borderline QB1 fantasy wise, even with the way that this offense is not chugging along. So if you include the Vikings game, then he's down like QB 18 something, QB 20. However, so over the last, people are just like fascinated with getting QB1 starts out of guys, whatever, but he's been pretty consistently a low end QB1, high end QB2, usually gets 2 touchdowns a game. Hasn't had big yardage. Now he's getting Allen Lazard back though. It appears he's got a shoulder injury. He's back at practice this week. It appears that he's going to play. He's going, last time we saw him, he played against the Bills, did, from a fantasy standpoint, did okay. Threw a couple touchdown passes, one to Doubs. And so Doubs is kind of getting going a little bit again. And I think the big thing here, obviously, is the matchup against not your Lions. You're not a Lions fan.
No.
But the Lions are 30th in adjusted fantasy. I just want to point out that we do talk about other teams in terms of great matchups. The Lions are 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They've allowed an average of 277 yards passing, 1.71 touchdowns, 8.39 yards per attempt to opposing quarterbacks. So I think the interesting thing here will be whether or not the defense shows up at all. I mean, is there any team in the history of time that needs a win more than the Packers do this week? I mean, they are on lights. The Lions are, they have to beat the Lions this week. So if they don't show up, if the defense has some sort of uninspired effort and the Lions are able to put up some points, then this could get into kind of a low key shootout. I would expect the Packers to really bring it, but I don't feel like they should be favored on the road or really favored at home at this point, watching them play. But I do think that he will have a good fantasy outing this week. I think certainly in DFS as well. I think he's an interesting stack with Lazard and or Doubs.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. In terms of teams that you still like on the fringe of, okay, I still believe in you because you have Aaron Rodgers, but you got to win this one. If you don't, then it's not worth talking about anymore.
And I should just mention Aaron Jones is in stack too in DFS. Like we forget about him sometimes as a running back, but he's obviously kind of half receiver right now.
Yeah. In fact, I'd probably choose him over, Allen Lazard at this point. But I understand your point when you're stacking them. Kalif Raymond, you list as a sneaky start, same game, and then or Josh Reynolds. I mean, it could go either way. And I think Josh Reynolds, I forgot what was he in the breakout receiver model last week, or maybe Josh? No, you know what? He was in your sneaky starts last week, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think he is dealing with his knee injury, and the reason Raymond is in this space right now, or like in this like the sneaky start possibility, because Kalif Raymond is not a name that we would normally trust in this situation, is that the Lions have so many injuries at receiver. DJ Chark is out. Reynolds was not at practice, I don't think Wednesday or Thursday, so waiting to see what he does on Friday. Reynolds dropped a touchdown last week. Should have scored. But Raymond has had a pretty good little run here for him. He's gained 41, 45, 95, and 76 yards in the last 4 games. TJ Hawkinson's been traded away. So it's just kind of, if Reynolds is out, it's kind of down to St. Brown, Raymond, and DeAndre Swift, and maybe they get some tight end production. And this is a bad matchup. So like the Packers are 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So this is a desperation type dart throw. He's not like a confident start, but given the situation and the amount of routes he's probably going to run and likely game script, he's a sneaky start this week.
All right, one more. Let's end on a tight end, and it's actually 2 tight ends. Noah Fant. I'm imagining, John, Noah Fant or Will Dissly, the tight ends against Arizona, since, as you can see from the graphic, Arizona not great against tight ends this year.
Yeah, you don't want to start both of these guys. But what I'm keeping my eye on is Fant's, I think it's a hamstring. If he's out, then Will Dissly is going to be a really sneaky start. If Fant plays, he's been trending up. He's been in that 70% snap share, I think, the last couple of weeks, getting a little bit more involved. And this is a fantastic matchup. The Cardinals have been bad against tight ends for several years now and continue to be bad against tight ends. Fant, 6 for 45 on 7 targets against the Cardinals back in week 6. So especially in a PPR format, he's a guy that could, get you to 10, get you to 12, which is what you're looking for in a sneaky start.
All right, let's wrap things up with our breakout receiver model. Had a couple of hits last week. You had Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Evan Ingram, who caught a touchdown pass in London. Could have had another touchdown pass, too, at one point. DJ Moore, of course, had the big game. Romeo Doubs, finally, to one week later, right? One week later after you had him as the sleeper sneaky start of the week, Romeo Doubs goes off among others. So who's popping this week, John?
Yeah, I'm looking at that Buccaneers offense. Mike Evans is the number 1 receiver. He's underperforming in the model. He's underperforming by 4.9 fantasy points. And whenever there's a player of his caliber or this type of caliber this high in the model, it's very interesting. It's kind of eye-opening. I think we had Jamar Chase in that situation, and then he had 2 touchdowns. So definitely Mike Evans. Chris Godwin is coming in 7th. He's definitely due for a touchdown. We got into a little bit in the AMA that, are these guys going to, Godwin, is he going to catch touchdown? He's not. His touchdown rate's really low. If you look at Tom Brady, his career touchdown rate's much higher. It's twice of what he's doing right now. He's only got 9 touchdowns in 8 games. I would expect them to get the ship righted a little bit to where he's averaging 1.5. 1.7 touchdowns per game. They're throwing the ball enough that he should be throwing for 2 touchdowns per game. So things have been just a little off. And I think if, you're looking at Brady, you're looking at Evans, you're looking at Godwin, these are really 3 really good players that should get on the same page at some point. So that's definitely one. Doubs is popping in the model again because he, so underperformed his usage, even with the good game last week. So certainly, he's -5 on his differential between his expected and his actual. And now you're throwing in a great matchup against the Lions. I still think he could break out further. And Davante Adams. So we talked about good players that are popping in the model. He's -2.8 and his differential expected 10. He's been scoring 7.2 and a half PPR. His P10 efficiency, which is the number that we include in the model to look at the 10 weeks prior to the 3-week span that we look at for the model, is 160. So whatever you expect from Davante Adams, he tends to score 1.6 times that. Wow. And right now he's been underperforming based on what's been going on the last few weeks. So I would expect him to get it going against Jacksonville as well. And finally, at tight end, Pat Freiermuth. They're on bye this week, though, right? The Steelers, or are they playing?
No, the Steelers are on bye.
Okay, so let's not talk about Pat Freiermuth. Coming out of the bye, I would expect Pat Freiermuth to go up.
Yeah. Great stuff as always, John. You can follow John on Twitter. You can check out the at 4for4_John Twitter handle right there. Maybe it's right there, depending on where my finger is. At Anthony Stalter. And then, of course, you can follow us on 4for4 or at 4for4 on Twitter as well. So when you look at your 4for4.com subscription, you'll see outstanding rankings by John, sneaky start articles. We got DFS stuff, betting stuff. I mean, we got the content is great at 4for4.com. So you want to make sure that you hop on. If you've been on the fence at all, make sure you take advantage because I think the price is down, correct?
Yes, we had a Halloween sale last week, and then now the prices are even lower for rest of season. So great time to jump on if you want to check out the site.
Absolutely. Everybody, good luck this weekend in your games. We appreciate you watching and or listening, and we'll be back next Friday on the Most Accurate Podcast.